So I am Salvatore Cumella. I'm the executive director here at the Matheson, and I'd like to welcome you in and thank you for coming to tonight's program. Tonight's program is Democracy in Florida, a Work in Progress by Dr. Steve Noll. Just some quick notes, some upcoming programs that we have here at the museum. Tomorrow night, October 24th at 7 p.m., we're proud to be partnering with the Latina Women's League and the League of Women Voters to have a Spanish language program entitled A Citizen's Right to Know. Candy Birch will be showing a video and discussing the constitutional amendments and local referendums, and that's tomorrow night at 7 p.m. here at the museum. It's free, but we ask that you register on our website, mathesonmuseum.org. Next week, Wednesday, October 30th, we have a program called Cora Roberson, Gainesville's Own Hidden Figure, with Yvette Carter. That's Wednesday, October 30th at 7 p.m. Again, that's free with registration on our website, mathesonmuseum.org. We would like to thank our sponsors for this evening's program, Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, Florida Humanities, the City of Gainesville, and the Department of State Division of Arts and Culture, the Florida Council on Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida. Tonight's program, Democracy in Florida, a Work in Progress, is a companion program to the Voices and Votes Alachua County exhibit and the Smithsonian traveling exhibit, Voices and Votes, Democracy in America, which was on display here at the Matheson this past summer. Dr. Steve Noll is an instructional professor in the Department of History at the University of Florida. His focus on Florida history and disability history. His latest book is entitled Writing for the Public Good, Essays from David Colburn and Bob Graham. He has been named one of the 300 best professors in the U.S. by the Princeton Review. Please welcome me in welcoming Dr. Steve Noll.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to see everybody's here. It's wonderful. The book that was just mentioned, it's for sale in the back. You're not leaving till you buy one, and buy another. Christmas is coming. And you have Christmas with me, so Christmas is definitely coming. I will sign your copy as well. So it's a pleasure to be here, not only for everybody in person, for all the thousands that are streaming online. So that's great. So let's see if I can get this thing to work. And of course I can't. Okay. All right. So as Sal said, this is in conjunction with the Voices and Votes from the Smithsonian and Democracy in America, which is an amazing exhibition. I hope you guys got a chance to see it when it was here. Anybody see it when it was here? Pretty good, huh? It's really nice. So I saw it when it was in other places. I am the lead scholar for this exhibition around the state, and I have not been able to go around the state. I was supposed to go last month to Cape Coral when they had it, and guess what? Our friend Helene came to that instead. So crazy. So I'm happy to be here. And this is in conjunction with Florida Humanities, which is this wonderful cultural organization throughout the state located in St. Pete. They were just visited by Milton, and they are now holding special events at the open air Trop baseball stadium as a result of that. If you're not a member of Florida Humanities, I encourage you to be that, just to get their magazine called Forum, which is remarkable. If you're interested at all in anything going on culturally, historically, musically, around the state, historically, and in the present, it's a great resource to have. So with that, let's get to going. So Democracy in Florida, the colon, and historians always have to have a subtitle, right? So the subtitle I was going to use is Democracy in Florida, colon, a oxymoron, but I just told I couldn't do that. So it's Democracy, a Work in Progress. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to start with Fort Mose. In the 18th century, the early 18th century, Florida is part of the Spanish Empire, and there is tension between the Florida lands controlled by the Spanish and the English lands in Georgia and South Carolina that are colonies. And Fort Mose becomes the first free black settlement in the United States. How so? Escaped slaves from English colonies of Georgia and South Carolina are fleeing to Florida for freedom and democracy. What do they get when they get here? Well, they get to be subjects of the king, and they get to be Catholic individuals. So they promise fealty to the king, they promise to be good Catholics, and they become in that subjects and free subjects. So Fort Mose is located just north of St. Augustine, and it is a place that is the first place where if British soldiers come to attack Florida, they get into attacking Fort Mose. And Fort Mose is established with maybe the most interesting man in colonial America, much more interesting than Paul Revere, much more interesting than George Washington. I mean, this is a multicultural individual. This is a guy born a slave somewhere in Africa, brought over to South Carolina, and escapes from South Carolina to freedom at Fort Mose, defends Fort Mose as the captain of the Free Black Militia. And in 1738, when James Oglethorpe attacks, doesn't succeed. This man petitions the king, which means he is not the king's emissary, the king himself, which means he is able to read and write, which is remarkable. Petitions him for, and even more important, he can read and write in Spanish, so that's really amazing, right? So he petitions the king for land, I need land because of what I did for the Spanish government. That land is granted to him, and then because he's a wanderer and adventurer, he goes off on a piracy expedition, a privateering expedition for the Spanish government to attack British ships. Guess what? He's captured again, enslaved again, escapes again to Florida, right? So back and forth. And in 1763, when he is back at Fort Mose, guess what happens? The Spanish give Florida to the English. It is now an English colony. And guess what happens to him? He leaves with his entire family and the entire group of escaped slaves from now free people from British colonies. They go to Cuba, right, where he dies. But his relatives come back when Spain is returned Florida by the English 20 years later, and they end up there. So it's a remarkable story, right? This is a picture of what we think he looks like. We're not sure what he looks like, but it's kind of a nice picture. So Fort Mose is now a state historic site, and they're in the process with UF anthropologists and archaeologists and historians of not only having it as a state park, but trying to restore and recreate the fort that's there. So just another great thing to see when you go to St. Augustine, as opposed to getting caught in the great traffic that's there, right? So second Spanish period, right? 1783 until 1821. The Spanish hold on Florida is rather tenuous. The Spanish Empire is crumbling. Spain is under duress from the United States, who wants this land. And in 1812, the Spanish government issues a remarkable new constitution, the first non-draconian legal royal constitution, a monarchy that is going to have a parliament that has power. So it's kind of an amazingly open democratic thing. And so what's the Spanish government do? They say every colony of Spain has to establish a monument, a marker, a memorial to this new freedom within the Spanish Empire. So where's it built? In the plaza in downtown St. Augustine, right? So where it sits today, the Constitution Monument. But, of course, democracy is tenuous, as we've seen, right? 2 years later, it's reneged. Spain goes back to autocratic rule with relatives of Napoleon, and they say to everybody, take down the monuments because this is something that we don't like. Well, I guess the email in St. Augustine was down, and they didn't get it. So this is among the only extant monuments to this Constitution in the world, which is remarkable. So again, a monument to democracy. So when we talk about democracy, America's a democracy. So Florida becomes part of this in 1819, a treaty is signed between the Spanish and the Americans called the Adams-Onis Treaty. And of course, we all know the wheels of government turn extraordinarily slowly. So it takes 2 years after the treaty is signed for Florida to become an official part of the United States. So Florida becomes a part of the United States. Florida was divided into 2 colonies, East and West Florida. Now it's 1 colony, Florida, right? And now it's a territory of the United States. So part of this kind of American political tradition, Florida is going to be sending representatives to Congress, non-voting representatives, but representatives nonetheless. They're going to have a territorial governor who is appointed by the federal government. So Florida is now part of the U.S., right? And this man, Joseph Hernandez, actually Jose Hernandez, born in Spanish St. Augustine. And when the Spanish leave, many of his compatriots leave with the Spanish to go to Cuba or other places. But he stays. He stays. And guess what? You can't be named Jose in America, right? So he changes his name to Joseph Hernandez, right? And he becomes the first territorial representative to the United States Congress. And in talking about multicultural and diversity, right? He's the first Hispanic to be in the United States Congress. He can't vote, but he's there, right? So that sounds wonderful. I mean, it's great, you know, multicultural diversity. Well, guess what? He's also a slaveholder, right? Right? He's also a slaveholder. He's got lots of plantations all along the East Coast. He's growing cotton. He's growing sugar, and all farmed by African-American enslaved people. Also, he's involved in the really ridiculous capture of Osceola under a flag of truce, in which Osceola comes in for a parley with American soldiers, and, oh, guess what? We're going to capture you. So, you know, an interesting guy. When Florida becomes a state, he attempts to be the first United States senator from Florida. He's defeated, and because he's defeated, he goes to Cuba, right? Which is where he ends up. His son has moved to Cuba, where he establishes a plantation with enslaved workers running the plantation, and he goes there and he dies. But an interesting story, right? And tells us kind of, when we talk about Florida, and oh my God, English is the only language, right? Understand, you know, this guy. If this guy would work, we would get, well, can you move that? Okay, so Florida has to have a constitution, right? From 1821 till 1838, Florida is just ruled by just fiat law, right? So in 1838, Florida establishes the first constitution, which is crazy because guess what? It's not a state yet. So this is in anticipation of statehood. And it's not a state yet because you need a threshold of population to be a state. And there's like 12 people living in Florida, right? Right. And 12 and 6 of them are enslaved people. So, you know, but these guys decide that they want to have a constitution. And if you go to Port St. Joe, Florida today, which has managed to survive all the hurricanes, you will see this bizarre diorama of the Constitution being established in 1838. The crazy thing, it's established at a place called St. Joe, which no longer exists. It was wiped off the map after they established this Constitution. Yellow fever epidemic, which killed the governor, and 2 hurricanes. Florida, not a great place to live back then. So the Constitution is established, and this will be the Constitution that Florida will exist under when it reaches statehood in 1845. It will be the Constitution that Florida has until secession in 1861. And when we talk about interesting characters in the antebellum or before the Civil War period, there's another multiculturalist, David Yulee, formerly David Yulee Levy, Jewish man born in St. Thomas, right? His father, Moses Levy, actually establishes a Jewish communal settlement south of Gainesville near Micanopy that's going to be like a Jewish place, kind of like Palestine. Never works out. It's too damn hot. But Yulee becomes Florida's first senator. And the first Jew to serve in the American Congress. So we have the first Hispanic, the first Jew, although at some level he denies his Judaism. And guess what? He's a slaveholder too, right? So Yulee is an important figure in early Florida because he has a vision for making Florida an important state. So he helps to build the first cross-state railroad from Fernandina, not Fernandina Beach, because that's what it was called in the 1920s, 1930s. They changed it because Fernandina Beach sounds a place that people want to go as opposed to just Fernandina. From Fernandina to Cedar Key, not to Cedar Keys, not Cedar Key, which was the major port on the West Coast, superseding Tampa, right? So he's going to build this railroad, and there it is. And there's his statue in Fernandina Beach. You can see him there, right? And there's his railroad, and his railroad is going to connect. Cedar Key is going to be this major port all around. And Yulee's this really important guy. He's got plantations throughout Florida too, including one called Cottonwood, which grows cotton, in Archer, right? And rumors have it that somehow, when the Confederate nation collapses and Jefferson Davis tries to escape, that the Confederate gold is buried in Archer. Right. So we've got any people with metal detectors, they can go out there after the talk and we can try and find that, right? So, Yulee, this remarkable figure, and Yulee certainly will be a major Confederate person. He resigns his commission in the Senate to join the Confederate Senate himself. So slavery, Florida's an extraordinarily small state, smallest population in the American South, smaller even than Arkansas, at the same population size basically as Delaware. That said, between 40 and 50% of that population is enslaved Africans, right? And African Americans. And when we talk about Florida, we're not talking about the peninsula, right? Most of Florida is in the Panhandle, I-10, right? Those counties called Middle Florida, they are the wealthiest counties in Florida, and today they're among the poorest, right? They're the wealthiest because they have considerable plantations. When we talk about plantations, what are they growing? They're growing cotton, which is remarkable, right? And when you look at figures of cotton growth, Leon County, which is Tallahassee, thank you, I know that. Tallahassee, it's the fourth largest cotton producing county in Florida and Georgia. Now, my friend who lives in Georgia said, well, Georgia counties are very small. There's 163 counties. That's not, well, it's still pretty important, right? And large plantations there with significant numbers of slaves, right? Many of whom of these slave owners are the powers that be within the state of Florida, right? And you can see these are two things from the state of Florida, right? This is from Jacksonville, right? This is from Jacksonville, right? Auction, courthouse steps. Again, I'm sorry about the language. Negro boys and one woman, right? And runaway slave, $50. That's a lot of money. Hillsborough River, Tampa, right? An area that is not really well populated, but well populated enough to have a plantation there, and a plantation in which African Americans are running away. And certainly Florida is an easy place to run away for because there's not many people here. There's lots of open land, lots of land that people don't want to get to because it's all swampy, so they can easily escape, right? Again, that's what it is. His color is that of a dark mulatto, 1860, on the cusp of the Civil War, right? So because Florida is so embedded in the South, Florida secedes from the Union in January of 1861. Third state, right? Florida is not holding back. Oh my God, maybe we should. No, Florida is jumping all in, right? And the president of the secession conference, a man named John McGee, guess where he's from? Alachua County, right? This is what he has to say. Right? Slavery is the element of all value, and a destruction of that destroys all, right? And that destroys all that is property. I mean, if anybody tells you, and it's everybody's grandma tells them, well, Civil War is about states' rights. Say, hey, grandma, read what they say. Read what they say. And this is what they say, right? Right. They tell you flat out, it's about slavery, plain and simple, right? This is the Ordinance of Secession that you can find in the Florida State Museum in Tallahassee. This is, right? Important from the South. Florida secedes from the Union, right? Amazing stuff. So Civil War takes place, right? South loses. I hate to tell you that, but the South loses, right? And Governor John Milton, slaveholder from Jackson County. Anybody know what the county seat of Jackson County is? Mariana. It's Mariana, right? And he's got a plantation there called Sylvania, which anybody know what that means? Woods, right? Woods, right? So South is losing. He doesn't want to lose, right? Like somebody else we know, he doesn't want to lose, right? What happens? Shoots himself, goes to his plantation in Mariana, blows his head off. Death would be preferable to reunion with those Yankees. Why? They're going to take away my slaves, right? Okay, there it is. Suicide, right? There he is, right? So now the war's over. The governor's dead. We have to be reunited in the Union, and we establish a new constitution, replacing the 1838 one, replacing the one during the Civil War. And it's going to be a whole new world. The slaves are now free. Those enslaved people are now free. So what does that mean? It means one thing. They're not slaves. We're not sure what it means. Does it mean they are citizens? Can they vote? Democracy is about voting. Can they vote? Can they marry? Can they move around? Can they serve on juries? Can they carry weapons? We're not sure. All we're sure is they're not slaves. So the new Constitution is going to tell us maybe what they are or what they're not. Okay? The new Constitution under Andrew Johnson basically says everything's the same except they're not slaves, right? Right. Unless he be a white man, no man shall be a senator, right? So basically, we are precluding African Americans from participating in public life, right? We now know they are not slaves, but we also know they're not citizens as well, right? Okay, how's that going to work out? At some level, the South may have won, right? Okay, so other Southern states have these same requirements in their new constitutions. A series of laws are passed in Florida and other states called black codes, in which basically African Americans are prevented from doing anything. We now know they're not slaves, but they can do nothing else. Right? So that doesn't fly. And this Constitution is going to be replaced. Okay, Reconstruction, the time period from 1865 until 1876, right? In which the South is going to be reconstructed. The Union is going to be reconstructed. American social fabric is going to be reconstructed. Fabric reconstructed with African Americans participating in public life at a point never before and not again for over 100 years, right? So Reconstruction is this window of opportunity for Black people. And certainly white Southerners are not going to like this. So, right? The Jackson County War, Jackson County, home of the former governor, now the deceased governor, right? Reconstruction and resistance. His friends are not wanting African Americans to participate in government. And they're going to fight against that. They're going to fight against that with violence. They're going to kill blacks who attempt to vote. They're going to be fighting over voting. And again, when we talk about lynching, it's not just random lynching, right? It's at some point, we talk about lynching, it's over lynching over sexual contact. Here, it's lynching over black men trying to vote, right? Not black women, God forbid, because women can't vote anyway. So, but okay, so new Constitution is established as the old one is pushed away, and a new Constitution, a biracial, one party, Republicans, which never voted in Florida. How many votes did Abraham Lincoln get in the presidential election of 1860? Good answer. None. None. Nothing. Right. So now we have Republicans voting, whites and blacks, very different. Right. No, there's no colors in this thing. Right. There's no colors. Every male person, doesn't say every. Right. So they can what? They can vote. And they're voting in high numbers. Not only can they vote, they can participate. And the really bizarre thing is, we're giving participation in government to the Seminole Indians, which is remarkable. Guess what the Seminoles say? We don't want to participate in your stuff. No, so they don't participate. But the fact that it's there is truly amazing, right? The representatives, right, has to be a member of the tribe. It can't be some white guy, right? So really, really interesting. And so Florida changes dramatically. I mean, this is democracy, right? This is democracy. A new governor, a Republican governor, Harrison Reed, right? His inaugural address, born to freedom, right? Believes slavery is an unmitigated curse, right? He's a northern white guy, but He's got black people in his administration. He's got black representatives in the state legislature. There are black voters throughout the state. There are black public officials in particularly Tallahassee and especially Gainesville, right? So it's remarkable. So who feels left out? White Southern Democrats, right? And they're not taking this lightly. So there's Harrison Reed, right? And Josiah T. Walls, who's on the wall right there, same picture, right? Josiah T. Walls, among the first African Americans to serve in Congress from Florida, representing Gainesville, right? Moves to Gainesville from Virginia, served in the Union Army, moves to Florida because he wants to get the annual pass to Disney as a resident, right? And so, he serves in Congress, and every one of his terms, he serves 2 terms, and he's 3 times running. Every one of them is contested. Anybody know who contests him? J. Finley, former Confederate general, former judge in Tennessee. And for those people who don't know who he is, school that my kids went to, that my wife taught at, that has now been renamed, right? Right, renamed for someone who helped drop the atomic bomb, but we won't go there, right? So Walls is a remarkable figure, right? Serves in Congress during Reconstruction. After Reconstruction, he remains in Gainesville, advocating for the rights of African Americans. Those are slowly being pushed away, right? He ends up moving to Tallahassee, where he gets a position working at what will become Florida A&M as an ag professor. He got a job. He actually ran a plantation raising oranges on Orange Lake, shipping those oranges across the Alachua Savannah, which was a lake at that point, until the Great Freeze of 1894-95. Then he moves to Tallahassee. He dies in 1905. And the crazy thing is, this guy's a remarkable, important figure. No one knows where his grave is. No one knows. His death is not reported in any white paper in the entire state of Florida, which tells you how marginalized these guys have become when Reconstruction ends, right? So important figure, right? And Reconstruction ends with the bizarre election of 1876, right? Bizarre because usually governors and presidents are elected from the same party at this point. But in 1876, Republican Governor Marcellus Stearns, who became governor because he was lieutenant governor and the governor died. He's a Union War veteran, and he's the incumbent. He's running against a Democrat named George Drew, right? And George Drew at some level makes promises that we're going to get northern industry to come down here. We're going to cut taxes, right? Republicans going to cut taxes, right? And George Drew, an incredibly tight, look at how few people are voting, right? 50,000 people, right? It's less than go to a Gator football game, right? Right? And look at how close it is, right? It's really close. Right? Again, Republicans won't win again until 1966. Okay, so that means Reconstruction's over in Florida. But nationwide, what happens? Florida only has 4 electoral votes, so it's not really important, right? Because the population's so small. Hayes, Republican, Tilden, the Democrat. And guess who wins this state? We're not sure. It's contested. Both parties claim that they won. Both parties claim that that the other party has cheated, that they have intimidated voters, that they have closed the polls early, that they've thrown away ballots from the other party. So what happens? As part of this deal, there's a 15-member electoral commission that decides that Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina's southern votes are going to go to which party? To the Republican Party, right? And therefore, Rutherford B. Hayes is the president by 1 electoral vote. If Florida had gone the other way, it would have been Tilden. But because of that, guess what they say? Oh, because Hayes wins Florida, we're going to let George Drew be the governor, right? So we have a Democratic governor and a Republican presidential winner, right? So what's the result? All the federal troops in the South are gone. Redemption, white Southerners are back. White supremacy, home ruled, restored, right? Reconstruction's over. Democracy is ended, right? It's ended. So, this is some of the things from Boyd Murphy is back here, who curated a great exhibit at the Library East, Smathers Library, on Florida and elections. These are taken from there. This says, is testimony at to the commission from the story of Florida. It's all this stuff. This is about Florida and what's happening in Florida. And how basically corrupt this whole thing was, right? So Reconstruction is over. So what do we do? Here's J.J. Finley, right? Running again. He's not running against Walls. He's running against a white Republican. And look at this. Finley contested Bisbee's election. Bisbee contested the election. Bisbee contested, back and forth, which tells us that Republicans still have some power. But every election is what? Contested. And there's Finley wearing a uniform. Guess what uniform he's wearing? Confederate, right? Yeah. So, go Flyers. That's what I said. So what do we need? We need a new constitution, because the old constitution said what? Why it's okay to have black people, right? This constitution, 1885, we can't say black people can't vote, because that's against the 15th Amendment, right? But we can put things in there like Section 8, not Section 8 housing, but Section 8. The legislature have the power to make the payment of the capitation tax a prerequisite for voting. What does that mean? Poll tax, right? And I tell my students, that's not for strippers, that's not a poll, okay? It's voting, right? Prerequisite for voting. And guess who that disfranchises? Black people who don't have the money, and also poor whites. So if people say this is designed to prevent blacks from voting, what can they say? Doesn't say anything about race. You want to vote, get a job, right? You want to vote, don't be poor, right? And then this, right? Hereby prohibited in the Constitution, right? Crazy. This is finally overturned nationwide in the 1960s, right? In a case called Loving versus Virginia. Okay, so, right? Democracy deferred. Then there's Judge James Dean, not that James Dean, right? But James Dean, amazing, right? In the middle of all this stuff, right? Goes to Howard. When most lawyers just hang out a shingle and say, I'm a lawyer, this guy gets a law degree, ends up being a judge in Key West, right? In the 1880s, as African-American participation is decreasing. So what does he do? What do judges do? At some point, they marry people. And he makes the mistake of marrying a white guy and a black woman. And there's questions about their race, right? Because the white guy may not really be white. He may be Hispanic, and the black woman may be mulatto, but we're not sure. But that's not good enough. So what happens? He is removed from office for violating the Constitution, right? Ends up, guess what he does? Packs his bags and gets the hell out of Florida, right? Goes to Philadelphia. So, 2002, Jeb Bush reinstates him. He's been dead for 100 years, right? But reinstates him, which at some level tells us that, everybody recognizes the egregious nature of what happened there, right? And of course, Bush is going to do it because who took him away? Who removed him from office? A Democrat, right? So, Democrats are bad, but still, it's interesting, right? Interesting. I posthumously come to terms with part of our past, strengthen the foundations of our future. Yeah, okay. But so this tells us what's going on, right? And what's going on is, when George Drew becomes the governor, Florida's broke. Right? We had a lot of African Americans roaming the countryside, right? We don't want that. So what do? We can arrest them, but when you arrest somebody, what do you do with them? What do you do with someone when you arrest them? Put them in jail, but jail's expensive. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We got a great idea. Let's farm out our prisoners, almost all black, to private corporations, right? Convict leasing, right? Convict leasing. It's wonderful. We solve all our problems. We don't have to pay for jails. We don't have to pay for jailers. We don't have to pay for meals for these guys. And so, among the most horrific things of the Jim Crow era, right? That these prisoners are basically worked until they're died. And the criminal justice system actually becomes a labor brokerage agency. Some guy goes to the judge and says, I need some workers to build this thing. Okay, I'll get them for you. Look at this guy. He's wearing a hat in public. Let's arrest him, right? Look at this guy. He's wearing a T-shirt in a place. Let's arrest him. Let's put him in jail. And we'll charge him $50. I don't have to. I'll pay for it. Okay, problem. Right? And, names of history books are interesting. So one book that defines this thing is Worse than slavery, which is what my students are actually reading in their class this semester. Worse than slavery. Why is it worse than slavery? Because you have no vested interest, at least it's somehow in slavery, that slave is your property, right? And you have this way, none. So another book is called One Dies, Get Another. Pretty crazy. When does this end in Florida? 1923. And how's it end? A white guy gets caught up in this, right? A white guy gets caught up in this, gets beaten to death. And all of a sudden, everybody says, oh my God, this is horrific. A white guy from North Dakota, right? Oh my God, what's he doing in Florida? He's traveling around, right? And crazy because he didn't have any money and he's arrested and he wires, you guys are old enough to know what that means. He wires his parents to give him money. His parents get him the money, but by the time the money comes, he's already been farmed out to a company that works in Dixie County where he's beaten to death, right? And oh my God, it's awful. Not counting all those hundreds, maybe thousands of people who were killed in this process. Horrific. When we talk about, right, new convict camp killing startles community, right? So Jim Crow, Florida, right? This is a book by my former colleague, Paul Ortiz, right? Dade County, picture taken in the 1950s, right? So 19 laws, 1967, Sarasota has segregated beaches. Remarkable. Every aspect of life is segregated. And Jim Crow is two things: legalized segregation and systematic disfranchisement. So African Americans during Reconstruction were voting at like 78, 80% males, right, who are voting. Jim Crow is about 5%. And what's remarkable is that that 5% of African Americans actually believe in democracy enough to go there and deal with the stuff that they're subjected to and pay that money and everything else to be able to vote. Right? And so what happens? Well, we all know that the key to Jim Crow is constitutional acceptance. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, which says that separate but equal is okay. We all know separate is not equal, right? But that happens in Florida too. So in 1905, Avery Act, streetcars, laws passed by the state legislature saying that blacks and whites had to sit in separate parts of the streetcars, except if you're a black mammy, a black nanny, then you can sit in the white part because you have to take it. Now, that's among the most remarkable things about Jim Crow. We hate black people. We don't want anything to do with them, but yet we'll let them raise our kids, right? Crazy. So black lawyers, pretty damn smart, say this is not equal protection. If that black person sitting there can sit in the front, why can't I? So they go to the state and sue. And guess what? They win. Oh my God. Amazing. So what does the state do? Change the law. And so that's what happens, right? Segregation was soon reinstated, right? The Negro, again, Pennsylvania, again, sorry about the language, began to ride early, and it was noticeable they almost invariably occupied the front seats. Remarkable, right? So when we talk about Montgomery bus boycott, civil rights activism starts in the 1950s. Black Floridians are fighting against this in 1900, what we call the long civil rights movement. So, there they are, right? Amazing. And then there's this guy. There's this guy. Boy, we know this guy. You guys, we think Donald Trump may be a little unhinged, right? Sorry. This guy makes Donald Trump look like Kamala Harris. I mean, it's amazing. It is amazing. He's threatened people with weapons on stage, right? He has addressed newspaper men with guns. He's attacked black people at a war rally because he's governor during World War I. An unbelievable character, and his great thing, right? Kill the rats, vote for cats, right? And pay your poll taxes. So his great. Who's he appeal to? The crackers of Florida. And what's he say? He says, there are three people that are on your side: Jesus Christ, Sears Roebuck, and Sidney J. Katz. So, this guy, he's it's remarkable, right? Right. And this is him again. This is kind of the stuff. He's among the first people to have automobiles, right? And he doesn't even run as a Democrat. He is the only person in any state to ever win a gubernatorial election while running as a member of the Prohibition Party. He runs as a Democrat, and in the primary, he loses. After he actually wins, but the Democratic candidate says Katz won it unfairly, so it goes to the Supreme Court of Florida. They say Katz didn't win. And then Katz says, all right, I'll run as an independent third-party prohibitionist, and he wins. Remarkable guy. Amazing, right? Amazing. And when we talk about voting, I have to talk about this. Ocoee, 1920. First national election, and women can get the right to vote. First national election after the Great War, as thousands of African-American soldiers come back. And what are we fighting in World War I for, the Great War? To make the world safe for, what's this talk about? I can't hear you. Thank you. Democracy. And so democracy means I should be able to vote. So they go to vote. And guess what? They're turned away from the polls. And this man, July Perry, is turned away from the polls in Ocoee, Florida. Right? Showing his showing his gun and says, okay, well, it doesn't show his gun first. He's prevented, comes back with a gun and says, you need to let me vote. He's chased away from there, chased and lynched. And then whites fear what's going to happen. They go into the black section of Ocoee, which is just outside of Orlando, and burn it to the ground. Right? That's hallowed ground. That's a new monument, only placed up in the 21st century. This right? One man was lynched. All the colored people, again, sorry about the language, are afraid to do it. God knows it is terrible. I do pray in your chorus, have those murdered. Amazing, right? What a large number of people were burnt. Wholesale slaughter. Right? And certainly when we talk about wholesale slaughter in Florida, we have to talk about Rosewood. Just down the road from here, right? 40 miles from here, west. Again, assumptions about African-American men violating black women, right? The all-black town of Rosewood burned to the ground as we look for that guy who supposedly did this. And we all know now that didn't happen. But the town is destroyed. And then we talk about democracy, maybe, right? This is 1923. 1990s, what happens? The Florida state legislature actually apologizes and offers compensation to the descendants, right? Offers compensation. We can't call it what? The R word. Reparations, but and I tell this to my students, and I ask them, how many of you people here have applied to the University of Florida? And they all look at me like I'm an idiot, right? They all look at me. I said, did you fill out the application? Yes. Okay. Did you see the box? What box? The box that says Rosewood descendant. So if you check that box and you can prove it, you're a Rosewood descendant, the state of Florida will help you in your higher education at any state school or community college. Yeah, remarkable, right? I'm not sure that would happen today if we did this, but Holland and Knight, most powerful law firm in the state of Florida, right? Worked pro bono to get this for these people. Amazing. Considering Peter Knight is one of the biggest racists of all time in Florida, right? And because hashtag, it's ironic, right? So, 1920 certainly was that election where the first women are voting, and women in Florida are profoundly important in the democratic process. This is Mayman Jennings. Her husband was governor, William Jennings, cousin of William Jennings Bryan, right? And he's governor from 1900 to 1904. She's much more important than he is. He was the governor, but she's profoundly more important. Talk about democracy. She's involved. She is one of the founders of, ladies, what? League of Women Voters in Florida. Yes, she is. Right. She is pushing for women's suffrage. She's really big pushing for protection of the Everglades. Remarkable woman, even though she's wearing a hat with egret feathers. So again, there's lots of ironies here. He dies in like the 19-teens, I think, and she dies in the 1960s. So as a widow, she's this remarkable figure pushing for women's equality, pushing for democracy for women, right? And certainly these guys, anybody know what Koreshan is? Koreshan is this bizarre cult in Southwest Florida that now is a state park right just south of Fort Myers, right, in Edisto. And women are profoundly important within this organization led by this charismatic leader named Cyrus Teed. And you know, if you know your strange notions of religious fundamentalist cults, Koreshan, David Koresh, right? Okay, yeah. So I mean, not related, but certainly the notion of biblical stuff. But equality. I mean, all these women dress like this, and they have that's them advocating for votes for women. You know, so remarkable organization, pushing for this. And you know, 1915, before women get the right to vote nationally, they get the right to vote locally in Florida, and no one can figure out why in Fellsmere. Anybody know where Fellsmere is? It's in Brevard County. And still, I mean, historians have tried to look and see why are they allowing women to vote in Fellsmere? We still can't figure it out. But they're voting there. They can't vote in national elections, right? But they can vote in state elections and local elections. And this is a remarkable woman that people don't know much about. And we don't know where she comes from in Florida. We don't know. But she advocates for women's suffrage, and she takes it to the streets with Alice Paul. We know who Alice Paul is, National Women's Party, right? She is the oldest woman arrested for protesting for women to get the right to vote in Washington, D.C. The oldest woman who is taken to the Occoquan workhouse and held there for violating public laws against demonstrations. She's the oldest woman who was force-fed as they went on a hunger strike. So remarkable, right? National Women's Party, arrested and imprisoned. And, you know, this is what she says to the judge, right? And title of this is about democracy, right? I should be ashamed of these brave women that fight for democracy in America, right? I should be proud to die in, I mean, she's 75 years old, right? At a time when the average age of people dying is in their 60s. Remarkable figure, right? Remarkable figure. And then there's Mary McLeod Bethune, right? Votes for women. Right? Mary McLeod Bethune, black educator, comes to Florida from South Carolina, establishes what will become Bethune-Cookman University. At this point, it's just a school for girls. And in 1920, she's damned if she's not going to be able to vote. And who's going to try and stop her? The Klan. And she faces off the Klan, these clowns on horseback in full regalia. And this proud black woman with her students all dressed like that. And guess what? They back down. Remarkable. Becomes part of FDR's black cabinet. And guess where she is now? In the Capitol building, right? In the Capitol building. Replacing Edmund Kirby Smith as one of Florida's 2 statues in Statuary Hall. Who's the other one? Most important guy in Florida history. Who is it, boy? It's John Gorey. Everybody loves John Gorey because he invented air conditioning. So then there's this woman, Mary Dreier Robbins, moves to Florida, labor activist, husband is socialist. They moved to Florida. They moved to the middle of nowhere, right? They moved to this place called Chinsagut Hill and support votes for women, support activism, support labor activism at a time when in Florida, that's grounds for not good things, right? And there's her home in Hernando County, now owned by USF and the Hernando County Historic Trust. The crazy thing is, because he's such a liberal lefty pinko, right? He ends up with a tree given to him by the biggest pinko lefty in the history of the world, Vladimir Lenin, right? So this tree is there. And in the 1950s, both of these people, Raymond and Margaret Dreier Robbins, are dead. And the Boy Scouts from Tampa find out what? That there's a tree at Chinsagut Hill that was planted by a communist. They drive up there and they take it out. I mean, this tells you what democracy is like in Florida, right? And her papers are all at UF, which is remarkable. It's great stuff, right? And then when does Florida pass the 19th Amendment? 1969, right? Okay, what does that mean? I mean, women could vote because the 19th Amendment is the law of the land. But Florida doesn't pass it until 1969, which is amazing, amazing. First woman to serve in the Florida state legislature. Her uncle was mayor of Orlando, right? There she is, right? And I love this picture. Can you find her? Yeah, she's the only woman, right? In a sea of men in ties. Serves serves one term in the 1930s. And then there's this woman, first woman to serve in Congress. These are all Democrats. First woman to serve in Congress. Who's this woman? It's Ruth Breyer Owen. I can read. Yes, I know that. But who is it? Bryan. Who is it? It's William Jennings Bryan's daughter, right? Yeah. Because William Jennings Bryan moved to Florida, right? And guess what? Her election was contested as well, right? Her election was contested by people who said because she was married to a British guy, she really wasn't an American citizen. And I mean, it tells you how contested the notions of democracy are, right? And there's this woman, remarkable, Mary Lou Baker, runs for office during World War II and convinces the legislature to pass a women's rights bill that says that women's property belongs to them in marriage and not to their husband, right? Which is incredible. Now, why did they do that? Because it's during the war, right? What is it? Amazing, amazing. And she is attacked by her opponent in the primary because she's using her maiden name. And she says, I don't want to be known as a woman running on my husband's name because my husband is a hero in the war. And I don't want people to vote for me because of that. Remarkable woman. Guy's way too young, right? And then right during World War II, democracy. We're fighting against the forces of fascism and militarism and authoritarianism in Europe and in Asia. But yet not democracy here. African Americans are pushing for the double V campaign. Victory at home over Jim Crow, victory overseas over fascism in Germany and Japan. So the Supreme Court rules in 1944 in a case called Smith versus Allwright that the all-white primary is not all right. The white all primary is unconstitutional, that now blacks can vote in the primary. And in the South, that's the real election. Because how many people vote for the Republican candidate in Florida? 7, right? So it doesn't matter. The real election is the Democratic primary. And whites could only vote in that until this. So who takes advantage of this? Harry T. Moore, right? Harry T. Moore, amazing NAACP leader in Florida, Florida teacher. He organizes a thing called the PVL, Progressive Voters League, in which he registers thousands of African Americans to vote in the Democratic primary. Amazing. What's he get for that? Gets his house blown up on Christmas Day, 1951. He and his wife are killed. Right? And when we talk about heroes of the civil rights movement, this guy gets no credit. I mean, remarkable, because he's too early. I mean, remarkable figure. And somebody who should be known more. And again, it's all about voting. I mean, all about voting. The Progressive Voters League, right? And here it is, right? If we're to receive proper respect, we must exercise some voice in the election. Bingo, right? Bingo. It's all about the election. Remarkable figure. And his house in Mims has been restored as a memorial to him. And just like buildings in Alachua County, what building is Josiah T. Walls named after? Supervisor of elections. I mean, again, supervisor of election building in Brevard County is named after Harry T. Moore. Okay. And Ed Armstrong, mayor of Daytona Beach, white guy, white Democrat. White Democrats are associated with white supremacy, but he understands that there's an important black population in Daytona associated with who? Mayor McLeod Bethune, and Ed Armstrong courts their vote. And a bizarrely interesting biracial coalition in the midst of the Jim Crow South. Ed Armstrong and Mary McLeod Bethune, right? Amazing, amazing. And guess what? Coppers hold riot guns. I mean, basically forced out of office. Coppers hold riot guns at windows, a strongly anti-Armstrong publication. The Battle of Daytona Beach. Ed Armstrong is basically forced out of office for daring to have this interracial coalition. This is in the 1940s. Right? And then there's these guys. These guys somewhere, the Pork Chop Gang, North Florida Democratic politicians from places like Chipley and Mariana and Bluntstown. Right? And they're called the Pork Chop Gang because they bring the pork back to their district, but also because they have a hunting lodge outside of Tallahassee in which they spend weekends during the session drinking bourbon, shooting hogs, and killing them and eating the pork, right? And they are among the most malapportioned legislatures in the country, which means that as the population shifts further and further south, it's not recognized by how Florida legislature is represented. So by 1950, Baker County, which has 7 people, Baker County has the same number of representatives in the state legislature as Dade. Whoa, that's pretty malapportioned. And these guys are going to represent their interests, right? And who's part of that? Interesting. We think of them as good old redneck boys, right? Well, yes, well, we'll talk about that. What do? They fight against what? They fight against Brown versus Board of Education, passed in 1954, which says that segregation is illegal. They don't like that. And so the Pork Chop Gang pushes through this thing called interposition, which is a resolution. What's a resolution? A non-binding thing. Whereas, tell me when to stop. Whereas, can I stop? Whereas we decide that, so whereas we declare the Supreme Court resolution null and void in the state of Florida. Basically states' rights 90 years after the Civil War, right? Amazing, right? Senate adopts interposition. And then we get politicians who are basically going to destroy their political careers to say this is bad. This is Governor Leroy Collins, known as the most important Florida politician of the 20th century. And he writes this note against interposition. Try to read. I have my glasses, but try to read what he says here. So it says, this concurrent resolution of interposition crosses the governor's desk as a matter of routine. I have no authority to veto it because I take this means, however, to advise the students of government, you guys, who may examine this document in the archives of the state, which Boyd is curating, right? In the archives of the state in the years to come, that the governor of Florida expressed open dismay and vigorous opposition thereto. I feel the U.S. Supreme Court is improperly usurped. So he doesn't agree with what they said. He doesn't agree with the end of segregation, right? Because improperly usurped powers reserved to the states under the Constitution. I've joined in protesting such and seek legal means of avoidance. But this resolution declares decisions by the court to be null and void. If it is to be taken seriously, it is anarchy and rebellion against the nation, which must remain indivisible under God if it is to survive. Not only will I not condone interposition, as so many have sought me to do, I decry it as an evil thing, whipped up by demagogues and carried on the hot and erratic winds of passion, prejudice, and hysteria. Right? Okay. Right. If history judges me right this day, I want to be known that I did my best, right? If I am judged wrong, then here in my own handwriting and under my own signature is the proof to support my conviction. Leroy Collins. Amazing. Simply amazing stuff, right? And Collins ends up marching in Selma. Right? And then there's this guy. King of the Pork Chop Gang, governor of Florida from 1953 to 1954, because the governor of Florida died. And under that constitution, which is still around from 1885, there's no lieutenant governor. So who can become the governor? The president of the Senate. And it's this guy, Charlie Johns, from Stark, strong member of the Pork Chop Gang, railroad man, insurance salesman, and demagogue. And when the Brown versus Board of Education decision is passed, he says this could be the death of our power. We can't stop this. Not only do we lose our power, we lose our white power. Right? So what are we going to do? Well, we all know that black people in Florida are happy being segregated. So they must be being whipped up by who? Communists. Those communists. So we're going to find those communists that are whipping this up. So he establishes a committee called the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee, which is popularly known as the Johns Committee. Right? Senators and state representatives, including Mr. Florida Stadium himself, Ben Hill Griffin. But, okay. And we're going to investigate whether the NAACP is being supported by communists. So what do they find? No, they find nothing. They find nothing. They find there's no relationship. So therefore, if there's no relationship, the committee has no power. And if the committee has no power, I have no power. So we have to look for something else. What are we going to look for? We're going to look for gay people, because gay people are what? They're corrupting our youth. And where are those gay people? No, worse than that. Public schools and universities. So what? They could be communists too, because we know that homosexuals and communism go together, right? So UF is targeting. Professors are fired. Students are forced to leave, right? And they publish a pamphlet called the Purple Pamphlet, called Homosexuality and What Citizenship in Florida. 1964. Okay. By this time, I mean, this thing is, I mean, I showed it to students today. It is pornography at its finest, right? Amazing. It is prurient. And it's over the top. And this is anti-democracy at its worst, right? And because what's happening is not just people in Montgomery, but people in Florida are protesting against the fact that Brown versus Board of Education is not being enforced. So Tallahassee bus boycott, right? Not just in Montgomery. Reverend C.K. Steele, so interesting. In Gainesville, what's the name of the bus station downtown? I don't know. Rosa Parks, yes, I do know. Okay. What's Rosa Parks got to do with Gainesville? Nothing, right? But what's the bus station known in Tallahassee? Reverend C.K. Steele, because he led the bus boycott there. So it's local, right? And they win, just like they win in. So civil rights movement in Florida is robust and responsive and problematic. There it is, Tallahassee bus boycott. FAMU students, again, it's students involved, which is remarkable, right? And not just FAMU students, but white students from FSU as well, right? And Jacksonville, Axe Handle Saturday, 1960, as black students and young people go to integrate lunch counters in downtown stores, attacked by mobs of people with axe handles as the cops sit by and let these people get beaten, right? And again, great story, great title. It's never about a hot dog and a Coke, right? It's about dignity. It's about democracy, right? And certainly, we talk about Florida and civil rights. We talk about the Munson Motor Lodge in St. Augustine, in which African Americans and white people attempt to integrate a swimming pool at a motel, and the owner pours muriatic acid in there. Remarkably awful. And again, we talk about Birmingham, right? We talk about Selma. We talk about Albany, Georgia. This is Florida, folks. This is Florida. This is anti-democracy in Florida, right? And, yeah. Integrating beaches in St. Augustine, right? Black people dressed for the beach, white cops dressed for beating, right? Horrific, right? And you can see, the white mob, young white people, they're not ready to swim. They're ready to beat. And so black people put their bodies on the line for democracy. And there it is. What John Lewis has called the foot soldiers of the Civil Rights Revolution, right? There it is. This is downtown St. Augustine on that same plaza that the Constitution Monument is, where a Confederate monument stood until a couple of years ago. Right? Amazing. Right? Participated in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Foot soldiers. Amazing. Face of jailings, beatings, shootings, loss of employment, threats, and other dangers. Right? Amazing. For democracy. Right? And 1965 Voting Rights Act, President Lyndon Johnson, black woman in Florida registering to vote for the first time. Right? Voting Rights Act, all those states in the South under federal jurisdiction to make sure that black people can register to vote and participate in the democratic process. Right? And the democratic process is aided to by this Supreme Court, Swan versus Adams, in which Florida is finally equally proportioned legislatively. No longer will Baker County have as many representatives as Miami. This changes everything. Legislator ousted by court. Democracy triumphant with this. This is a remarkably important decision that I think it's significantly less play than it should, because I think it really changes the dynamics and allows for the legislature in the latter third of the 20th century to be much more progressive and representative of Florida, South Florida. And Maxine Baker, right? We all know the Baker Act. We don't know, a woman in the Florida state legislature, Maxine Baker, pushed it. And today we think of it, okay, that guy here in that chair right there is acting out during this talk. Let's jack him up and take him out on Baker Act. And my students said, oh my God, well, the Baker Act was designed not to do that. The Baker Act was designed to help people with mental illness, right? And she ended up saying, this is my attempt to help people has been hurt by people using it the wrong way. But again, democracy. Bill Kramer. Anybody know who Bill Kramer is? Communist? Yeah. Well, he ain't no communist. Bill Kramer is the first Republican congressman in Florida since Josiah T. Walls in the 1950s and 60s. He represents St. Pete, which has a significant population of old retirees coming down here from Michigan for lower taxes, warmer weather, and separation. So, Kramer's an interesting guy, right? So Kramer becomes the face of the Republican Party from the 1960s on, and is responsible for the election of the first Republican governor in Florida since Marcellus Stearns in the 1860s, Claude Kerr, a remarkably, amazingly flamboyant character. Boy, how great is he? He's in there with Sidney J. Katz. He believes in UFOs. He has some woman with him, a different woman all the time, a mystery woman who's dressed provocatively. Right? And as other southern states move towards Republican governorships, this guy's such an iconoclastic figure that the Republican Party doesn't really coalesce around him because he thinks Bill Kramer is too powerful, and so they hate each other. So even though Kramer helped him get elected, so Kirk serves one term, 1966 to 1970, and then he kind of drops off the face of the earth, right? And finally, a new constitution, replacing the one from 1885, right? A new constitution, and who wants it? All the people in South Florida. Who doesn't want it? All the pork choppers, the entire panhandle. They're happy with the way it is. They're so happy with the way it is, right? And this provides for the first time, a lieutenant governor, right? Which would prevent someone like Charlie Johns acceding to the governorship, right? So this is the Constitution that we have today, right? And David Colburn writes a book about this change from yellow. What's yellow dog Democrat mean? That means if a yellow dog is running as a Democrat, I will vote for that dog over Jesus Christ running as a Republican, right? Right? So why are we voting Democratic all the way? Because the Republicans took away our slaves. That's why, right? From yellow dog Democrat to red state Republican, right? Interesting. But it doesn't go so fast, right? First woman senator from Florida, Paula Hawkins. Her nickname, the housewife from Maitland, right? Elected in 1980. What? Anyone know what happened to her? She would, what? Yeah. Well, she had. Yeah, that's what she said about UF, right? Yeah. She had her papers here, and she said, "I don't want my papers at that pinko place," and she took them to the Winter Park Library. When I looked at her papers, they were still in boxes that said P.K. Young Library, which was amazing. But she was in a debate. This may be why people don't like debates, and the lights fell on her back, and she basically, was incapacitated. But really an interesting character. Great hair too, by the way. One term senator. Right? And then when we talk about women, who are important in the political democratic process. Neither of these people ever held political office, which tells us you can be in favor of democracy without being in the political process, fighting for the environment, saving the Everglades, saving the Alachua, right? Amazing women fighting into their old age against the powers that be that wanted to turn Florida into the villages, right? So, and then Janet Reno, first woman attorney general. 2 terms under Bill Clinton, right? She was Attorney General of Florida, and she was from Dade County, right? There she is, right? Dade County State Attorney, right? Amazing. What do we know her for? Horrific thing. Elian Gonzalez, right? Captured, sent back to Cuba. Reno. But Reno, I think, is not nearly as important as her sister, Maggie Herchella. That's what I mean. Never serves in Congress. Environmental activist, basically much more in common with these people. Remarkable woman, just died last year, right? 4-story height for buildings in her county along the beach. Right? Preservation of wetlands, amazing. It tells us what we can do through citizen activism for democracy, right? And when we talk about democracy, we want to talk about inclusion for people with disabilities, right? We want to expand the political process. These people deserve to have participation as well, right? And even though Claude Kirk was Republican governor, we had 2-term remarkable governors, Democratic governors at the end of the 20th century. Reuben Askew, Bob Graham, Lawton Childs, right? And many of the positive things that take place in Florida are under their administration. Many of the laws regarding slowing down growth, protection of water, protection of wetlands come under these guys, right? From the 1970s to 1998, these guys are governors with only one four-year term of a Republican, a guy named Bob Martinez, right? So amazing. So into the 21st century, Florida is in play, unlike the rest of the South, which is moving pretty quickly towards Republican control. Same people. I mean, South Carolina, Strom Thurmond's still there, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, becomes dyed-in-the-wool Republican, nothing changes, right? But in Florida, Democratic Party is still pretty powerful. We talk about democracy, we talk about Cuba. We talk about those thousands of Cubans who are fleeing Castro, coming to Florida, to Freedom Tower, right, where they are processed. Florida's Ellis Island, right? Amazing. They become part of the political process, dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, but there they are. What? These guys, Cuban Americans, right? All born there. Senator, Congresswoman, right? And not just Cubans are coming to participate. First Haitians to be mayors of cities, not only in Florida, but in the United States, participating in the process, right? And then there's this, an example of how Florida was in play a quarter of a century ago, right? I mean, what happened? What happened, right? So close, we're still not sure who won, certainly. Okay. Bush wins by 500 votes out of 68 billion, right? So, right? Crazy. Confusion at the polls, bad ballots, people not allowed to vote, right? People voting for Pat Buchanan because the ballots were wrong, Ralph Nader, right? Crazy stuff. Decided by the Supreme Court, right? But no different than almost any other election in Florida. Look at it. We talked about that. J.J. Finley, 1876, right? 1890, Wilkinson Call's election. Florida has this history of contested elections that no one knows who's really the winner. Right? Bush and Cheney won, get over it, right? Again, this is from Boyd's curated exhibit at the Smathers Library. Go and see it. It's remarkable, right? Yeah, they are, right? It's funny, but it's not funny, right? That's the thing. It's funny, but it's not funny, right? And then Republican ascendancy, right? 3 2-term governors and Charlie Crist, right? Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, Voldemort, Ron DeSantis, right? Right? There we are. Florida now, not in play, right? And the interesting thing is maybe, I mean, DeSantis won in 2018 by like 20,000 votes over a flawed candidate, right? Very flawed, yeah, right? And, I would argue that if Gwen Graham had won the Democratic primary, she'd have beaten him. But because of reapportionment and everything else, Republicans have a stranglehold on the. And then, we want to talk about a shameless promotion for my book, but these guys talk about democracy, the importance of the public good, that notion. The essays in here are remarkable. David Colburn, former history professor, mentor of mine, and provost of UF, Bob Graham, senator, and governor. Amazing, right? Amazing essays, and talk about the importance of democracy, the importance of civic literacy, the importance of understanding what's going on, and the importance of participation, right? So participation is going down because states are passing restrictive voting laws, including Florida. Anti-democracy, right? Anti-democracy. We don't want people to vote because if people vote, maybe they'll vote the way we don't like, right? So, highest number of people disfranchised. Florida still has the highest felony numbers of felons who can't vote, right? And then, voting is a right. It's a real right. And when we talk about Florida and democracy, we certainly, I'm not going to connect anything, but certainly Floridians are significantly involved in January 6th, right? And, I just, to me, this is the most remarkable thing about January 6th. I was just teaching my class, and we're talking about 1941, January. FDR gives the State of the Union address, January 6th, 1941. What's he talk about? The four freedoms. And when I didn't realize it was that same day, So that day, which is remarkable for its notions about democracy and freedom from fear, now January 6th is associated with this. So, irony, right? So we're going to end with this stuff, right? Vote. Get out and vote. Because democracy doesn't matter unless you vote, right? So there we go. I guess that's a football players thing, because that's big enough to put on Desmond Watson. We know Desmond Watson, 400 pounds, right? That's his voting thing. That's what he's. But so vote. So that's what I got. Thank you. Questions? If you have questions, we have a microphone that can be passed around. And if I don't like your question, we'll turn the mic off. No questions? Okay, John's got a question.
So recently, the state legislature has passed laws that constrain the teaching of history. Are we?
Do they? Not my class.
Are we? Not in your class.
Not my class.
Are we the first state in the union to do this?
No. Louisiana, Arkansas, no. We're in good company.
Yes.
Louisiana's gone farther than we have. Louisiana's mandating the using of the Ten Commandments in every classroom in public schools. Yeah. So no, we are not alone, but we are in the forefront, and certainly other states are moving toward in that direction. Indiana, particularly too. So, and again, it's not just not teaching history. It's not teaching history that they don't think whoever they are, because unattributed pronouns piss me off. Whoever they are, don't like.
Yeah. So where does it stand in the courts? I mean,
where does it stand in the courts?
Yeah.
UF professors and professors from around the state have sued to say this is infringement upon their rights, and it's in the courts. So whatever that means, right? It's in. Certainly, there are some judges who will be in favor of this. It depends on who it is. It's in, as we say, it's in litigation. And certainly, teachers have been warned or told of what they should or should not do. And I think at some level, Sean Adams, who's a guy that I teach with, said it best, be a teacher, not a preacher. So if you're a teacher, I think that you can teach what you want based upon being fair about how I talk about race. I talk about lynching. I don't blame you for being a white person, right? But I do say this happened, right? And you can't deny that. So, I mean, that's where it comes from. Hi, Carolyn.
Hello. So I'm putting together a reading list for my friends about democracy in Florida. In addition to your book and Dr. Colburn's book, do you have any other recommendations?
Um, Recommendations. Yeah, but not off the top of my head. I'll email you. But no, I get back to you. So, yeah, actually, yeah, Ortiz's book, but maybe the best book is Gary Mormino's book called State of Sunshine, Land of Dreams. Boy, you know any book? A book that Dr. Murphy has, Caroline, a book that Dr. Murphy has edited called Governors of Florida is a really good way to look at this. So, and of course I'm in there. So it's got to be good. But that's a great book. I mean, lots of the big names in Florida history are writing this, plus me. But I will get back to you. And thank you for coming. How's the dissertation coming? You finished? You are Dr. Nickerson? That's wonderful. Go Red Sox. Go Red Sox.
Yes. As you said, a mediocre team.
Yes.
That's how they ended. Our daughter went to J.J. Finley.
As my children did.
Yeah, for 6 years. And we live right next to the school. Right. So the bell would ring at 20 minutes before 8. And I'd say, Jane, time to get up. And she would go to bed dressed, climb out of bed, no breakfast, go through the backyard, climb over the fence. And I had to run around, make sure she didn't get hit by a car on 7th. And then I would make sure she got across the street safely. But going into the school, you always saw a picture of J.J. Finley.
Yep.
And you said, well, he was a Confederate general, I know, but he was okay.
Right.
But then, was it 4 years ago, it came out that, oh, he was a judge.
Right.
Could you give us the details of those cases where he judged that it was okay to release a slave to a lynch mob? Was it 1853? I kind of forget.
Well, first of all, I think it's important, the context of what happened. What happens in light of Black Lives Matter, people throughout the nation began to look at monuments and buildings and look at actually what happened with these people and find out, they're just not old white guys. They're old white guys who did things that were not necessarily good. And Finley, yes, as a judge, he ruled on cases in which African Americans were released and then lynched. So yes. So.
And was it after the war too? As well?
No.
It was just before.
Yeah, in Tennessee.
Oh, it wasn't here.
No. He moves to Florida like everybody else to get those free Disney tickets. So, yeah. But so basically, as a historian, I was okay with that. I thought Finley's an old white guy. Not a big. He's not well known, so it's okay. Well, yeah. Talk to my wife about the name that replaced him, David. So that she's not a fan of Carolyn Parker either. So,
Well,
yes, Lily, I will not talk so loud next to your office.
First, yes. Well, we'll talk about that later. But I know Professor Noll, because he is my neighbor. He's like my office neighbor. But so first, I want to applaud you for doing something that for decades I haven't seen done. Because literally, I remember when we had the first Iraq War. I remember the second Iraq War. The first Iraq War, I was a college student. The second Iraq War, I was in my first year of teaching. This is 24 years ago. And we had things called teach-ins where it was the same thing as like being at a demonstration in many respects, except that you weren't taking a position. You were just sitting there and learning. And this is a wonderful thing. This is exactly what we need to do. And we need to see that as something that public intellectuals like yourself should do. I'm not equipped because I'm not a specialist of Florida history, let alone U.S. history necessarily. But that's a big deal to just sit here and listen and learn. That's an act of public civic duty, especially in moments of crisis or stress or turning points. So thank you.
Thank you. Well,
And then
Yeah.
thank you. Wait, because I got more. And thank everybody for being here. I mean, we should all thank ourselves for being here, and listening and learning, because there's a lot of stuff that's new, including for those of us who are historians. So I want to say that the second kind of comment is about how some of the people that you mentioned are really unknown to us. And so we know certain folks because there are monuments to them, and then there are folks we know nothing about. And a lot of them are women, and a lot of them are people who took on obviously uncomfortable or positions that were just, as as you said, in some of these cases where there's a man who has no political reward to be gained. So here we are in a situation where today, where things are unracialized, where people don't say that because we're supposedly in a position where we're a society that's sort of beyond, we had our civil rights movement, etc. So we're beyond that. And so when you look at younger people, younger than you and I, we're not young necessarily, how, and you see them every day in the context of a U.S. history class, and I know you've had more TAs than I've ever had in my entire life for one class, because what you teach is very, very foundational, and then how you teach it deserves the support that you get. So you have a lot of publics there in your class. I'm getting to a question, which is number one. So how in a classroom environment where kids are sort of thinking that, on the one hand, a lot of them grew up where they didn't think that urgency was like a part of their world. How do you address that sort of lack of panic that might be there? I don't know if it's there or not, because I get a completely different kind of public when I teach. So, lack of panic on the part of undergraduates or young people in general, who might include people who are under the age of 30, who don't realize that we're at a turning point. That's the first question.
Oh, okay. Can I answer
Yes,
that?
exactly. Please answer.
I try in my classes to talk about the relationship of what's going on today with what happened in the past without being direct, without, like when we talk about what happened at Rosewood, or Japanese internment. So to get them to make the connection, as opposed to me saying, that sounds like what's happening with the Project 20. I don't want to say that, because that at some level is preaching. So so like today, I mean, one of the best moments, my class started today and two kids came up to me and said, I got my ballot. I got my ballot. You were talking about women just getting the vote. Now, so something like that makes it relevant and valuable. So I'm trying to make the past come alive for them, and for them to make the connection with what's going on today.
So here's the follow-up. So great. So then out of the classroom, and just as a individual citizen, what do you think is the greatest obstacle to democracy in Florida? Is it injustice
Well,
and lack of knowledge about that, or is